Dawn, September 1944. The North African desert stretched endlessly in every direction, pale sand bleeding into pale sky. From 15,000 feet, a German Messerschmitt reconnaissance plane carved through the morning air, its camera clicking methodically, capturing everything below. The pilot banked slightly, adjusting his angle. Through his viewfinder, he could see them clearly. Dozens of Allied tanks arranged in precise military formation just south of the Tunisian border. Sherman tanks, their hulking silhouettes unmistakable even from this altitude. Supply trucks clustered nearby, artillery pieces pointed skyward. The morning sun glinted off metal turrets and tracks. He snapped photograph after photograph, his heart racing. This was intelligence gold. A full armored division positioned exactly where Berlin had suspected. When he returned to base 3 hours later, the photographs were rushed to the photo interpretation unit, then transmitted directly to Luftwaffe High Command. By nightfall, German bombers were being fueled and armed. Target coordinates were confirmed. The order came down: destroy the Allied armor before it can advance. But there was one problem. Those tanks weren't real. They were cardboard, plywood, canvas stretched over wooden frames, painted shadows and clever angles, an entire phantom army conjured from scrap materials by one man with no engineering degree, no formal training, and nothing but imagination, desperation, and a child's toy pressed against his eye. This is the story of how a single soldier with a kaleidoscope outsmarted the most technologically advanced air force in the world. By 1944, the Luftwaffe's reconnaissance capabilities had become the stuff of legend and fear. While dogfights grabbed headlines and bomber raids haunted nightmares, it was the reconnaissance squadrons that truly terrified Allied commanders. These were the silent watchers, the eyes of the Reich, circling high above battlefields with cameras that could photograph square miles of terrain in breathtaking detail. Each sortie returned with hundreds of images, meticulously analyzed by trained specialists who could identify vehicle types, troop movements, even the stress patterns in camouflage netting. Intelligence officers often said the same thing: "You cannot hide from the Luftwaffe. If it exists, they will photograph it. If they photograph it, they will bomb it." This created an impossible problem for Allied forces advancing through North Africa and preparing for the Italian campaign. How do you hide an army when the enemy owns the sky? How do you mass forces for an offensive when every tank, every truck, every supply depot is catalogued from above within hours of arrival? The answer, it turned out, wasn't to hide. It was to lie. But not just any lie. It had to be a lie so convincing, so detailed, and so perfectly executed that trained German analysts would stake military strategy on its authenticity. It required someone who understood not just what the enemy was looking for, but how they were looking. Someone who could think like a photographer, an engineer, and a magician all at once. That someone was Colonel James Edward Thornton, and when the British Army found him, he was painting theater sets in a warehouse in Manchester. James Thornton was not a soldier by nature. Before the war, he had been a theatrical set designer, working in London's West End, creating elaborate illusions for stage productions. His specialty was forced perspective, the art of making small spaces look vast, distant objects appear close, and plywood painted with shadows look like solid stone. When conscription came in 1940, Thornton reported for duty like millions of others. He was 26 years old, rail-thin, with terrible eyesight that required thick glasses. The recruitment officer took one look at him and sighed. He failed the physical fitness requirements. His marksmanship scores were abysmal. During basic training, he collapsed twice during long marches. His commanding officers didn't know what to do with him. He couldn't fight, he could barely march. But Britain needed every body it could get, so they assigned him to the Royal Engineers, hoping he could at least build latrines or repair bridges. It was there, in a dusty engineering depot outside Cairo in 1943, that someone finally noticed his real skill. Thornton had been sketching in his notebook during a break, drawing the supply depot from memory, but with exaggerated perspectives that made the tiny outpost look like a sprawling fortress. A major named Geoffrey Blackwood happened to glance over his shoulder. Blackwood stopped cold. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked. Thornton shrugged, embarrassed. "Theater work, sir, sets and backdrops, making small stages look big." Blackwood stared at the drawing, then at the real depot, then back at the drawing. An idea was forming, wild and desperate, but just mad enough to work. "Thornton," he said slowly, "how would you like to build me an entire tank division that doesn't exist?" Within a week, Thornton was transferred to a classified unit operating under the innocuous name Visual Deception Detachment. His mission? Create decoys so realistic that German reconnaissance would believe them. Not just glance at them and move on, but photograph them, analyze them, and base strategic decisions on their existence. It was the most important role James Thornton had ever been given. It was also completely impossible, because he had almost nothing to work with. The workshop was a converted warehouse in Alexandria, stifling hot and smelling of dust and motor oil. When Thornton arrived, he found a handful of engineers, 3 bored privates, and a pile of materials that looked like refuse from a junkyard. Scrap wood, torn canvas, paint in mismatched colors, a few sheets of corrugated metal, some rope and netting. That was it. No steel, no proper tools, no factory support. "This is what we've got," Blackwood said flatly. "Make it work." Thornton stood in silence, adjusting his glasses, staring at the pile. Then he smiled. "Right then, let's start with perspective." He began by studying reconnaissance photographs captured from downed German planes. He analyzed them obsessively, measuring shadows, noting angles, understanding exactly what the camera saw from 15,000 feet. He realized something crucial. The Luftwaffe wasn't looking at tanks. They were looking at photographs of tanks. And photographs could be fooled. From altitude, a tank was just a shape, a silhouette defined by shadow, highlight, and outline.
It didn't need to withstand inspection up close. It just needed to look right from above. Thornton started sketching. He designed a collapsible frame made from wood and metal piping that could be assembled by 2 men in under an hour. Stretched canvas formed the body, painted with careful attention to light and shadow. He studied how real tank treads created patterns in sand and reproduced them with dragged rope. He observed how metal reflected sunlight at certain angles and added carefully positioned tin sheets to mimic the effect. The first prototype looked absurd up close. It wobbled in the wind. The paint was obviously fake. But when they photographed it from a ladder at a simulated altitude angle, something magical happened. It looked real. "My God," Blackwood whispered, staring at the photograph. "I can't tell the difference." But Thornton wasn't satisfied. Real tanks didn't sit alone. They came with support vehicles, supply trucks, artillery pieces, command tents. An isolated decoy would raise suspicion. He needed to build an entire ecosystem of deception. Over the next month, working 18-hour days in the brutal heat, Thornton and his small team created a catalog of fake equipment. They built plywood trucks with painted windshields, artillery pieces from drainage pipes and bicycle wheels, supply dumps from stacked empty crates draped in netting, even faked latrines and mess tents to suggest human presence. The attention to detail was obsessive. Thornton insisted that decoys be weathered to match real equipment, that tire tracks lead to and from each vehicle, and that cook fires leave scorch marks. He positioned everything according to actual military doctrine, spacing vehicles exactly as regulations required. But his greatest challenge was yet to come. He needed to see his work the way the enemy would see it, from the air, from a moving aircraft, through a camera lens. And that's when the kaleidoscope entered the story.
The problem was simple, but seemingly insurmountable. Thornton needed to verify his decoys from altitude, but the British had no reconnaissance planes to spare for practice runs over fake tank parks. Even if they did, developing and analyzing film took days. By then, German reconnaissance might already have photographed the real deployment. He needed a way to see from above, instantly, without aircraft. The solution came from an unexpected place. One evening, Thornton was walking through a Cairo bazaar trying to clear his head. A street vendor called out to him, holding up trinkets and toys. Among them was a child's kaleidoscope, brass and colored glass, the kind that created infinite reflected patterns when you looked through it and turned the cylinder. Thornton picked it up absently, holding it to his eye. The world exploded into fractured, repeated images. And then he stopped breathing. Because what he was seeing wasn't chaos. It was multiplication, repetition, the same image reflected at different angles, creating the illusion of depth and distance. He bought the kaleidoscope immediately and ran back to the workshop. Working through the night, Thornton disassembled the toy and modified it radically. He removed the colored glass and replaced it with clear panes set at precise angles. He added a telescoping tube from a broken periscope. Most importantly, he positioned the mirrors to simulate the downward viewing angle of an aircraft camera, reflecting the ground scene as it would appear from altitude. When he looked through his modified kaleidoscope at a decoy tank from ground level, the mirrors created an angular view that approximated an overhead perspective. It wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to spot obvious mistakes. Shadows pointing the wrong direction, proportions slightly off, details that looked right from eye level, but wrong from above. It became his secret weapon. Every morning before dawn, Thornton would walk through the decoy positions, his kaleidoscope pressed to his eye, adjusting, correcting, perfecting. He'd notice a shadow that didn't match the sun angle and repaint it. A vehicle positioned slightly wrong in formation would be moved. Details invisible to the naked eye became obvious through his makeshift optic device. His team thought he looked ridiculous walking around peering through a child's toy, but they couldn't argue with results. By August 1944, Thornton's Phantom Army was ready. It was time to see if the Luftwaffe would take the bait. The operation was codenamed Quicksilver, and its goal was audaciously simple: make the Germans believe a major Allied armored division was massing for an assault on one position, while the real attack came from another direction entirely. Under cover of darkness, Thornton's team moved into position 20 miles south of the actual Allied staging area. Working silently, they erected over 60 fake tanks, 30 mock artillery pieces, dozens of supply trucks, and even inflatable rubber vehicles that could be deployed in minutes. But this wasn't just about placing props in the sand. Thornton orchestrated an entire theater of war. He arranged for radio operators to broadcast dummy communications using proper military protocols. Engineers created false vehicle tracks leading from the position toward enemy lines. Small fires were lit at precise intervals to simulate cooking activity. They even played recordings of engine noises and construction sounds through portable speakers after dark. Every detail mattered. Every element reinforced the illusion. Thornton walked the site repeatedly, his kaleidoscope constantly at his eye, making minute adjustments. A barrel angled slightly wrong, a shadow that would photograph poorly. He was a perfectionist conducting a symphony of deception, and the Luftwaffe was his audience. On September 7th, the German reconnaissance plane appeared as predicted. Thornton stood in a concealed observation post, binoculars trained on the sky, watching the Messerschmitt make its slow pass overhead. His heart hammered against his ribs. Months of work, hundreds of hours. Everything came down to this moment. The plane circled once, then twice. Thornton's stomach dropped. Were they seeing through it? Had he missed something obvious? Then the aircraft banked away, heading north. They had taken the photographs. Now came the waiting. 48 hours later, Allied intelligence intercepted German communications, confirming what Thornton desperately hoped. The Luftwaffe had identified a major armored concentration in precisely the wrong location. The photographs had been analyzed by German specialists who confirmed the presence of British Sherman tanks, American-made artillery, and full logistical support. Threat assessment: extreme. Recommended action: immediate airstrike. On the night of September 10th, German bombers launched a massive raid. They attacked empty desert. Over 200 tons of ordnance was dropped on Thornton's cardboard army. Explosions lit the horizon like a false dawn. The fake tanks were obliterated, shredded into splinters and canvas scraps. Artillery pieces were blown to pieces. Supply dumps erupted in theatrical bursts of flame.
Thornton watched from a safe distance, a strange mix of emotions washing over him. Pride, certainly, relief, but also something darker. Those bombs had been meant for real soldiers, men who were now alive because of his deception. "We did it," Blackwood said quietly beside him. "We bloody well did it." But the real payoff came 70 miles away, where the actual Allied assault launched without interference. German forces, convinced the main attack would come from the south, had repositioned anti-aircraft batteries and reserve units to defend against the phantom threat. When the real tanks rolled forward, they met minimal resistance. The breakthrough succeeded beyond expectations. Allied forces advanced 40 miles in 3 days, a pace unthinkable under normal circumstances. Intelligence estimates later suggested that Thornton's deception had saved hundreds, possibly thousands of Allied lives. It had diverted critical German resources at a crucial moment. It had proven that creativity could be as powerful as firepower. And it had all been accomplished with scrap wood, paint, canvas, and a child's kaleidoscope. Thornton's operation was not unique, but it was emblematic of a shadow war, fought not with bullets, but with imagination. Throughout World War II, deception units on both sides employed artists, designers, magicians, and engineers to create elaborate illusions designed to confuse and mislead. The British operated entire fake harbors in Scotland to convince the Germans that the D-Day invasion would target Norway. The Americans created phantom army divisions, complete with shoulder patches and newspaper mentions. Inflatable tanks became standard equipment. Sound trucks simulated the noise of non-existent convoys. Double agents fed carefully crafted lies that seemed to confirm what reconnaissance photographs showed. It was warfare as theater, and men like Thornton were its directors. But these stories remained classified for decades after the war. The soldiers who fought with paintbrushes instead of rifles received no medals, no recognition, no place in the official histories. Their battles left no scars on the landscape, only in the minds of enemy intelligence officers who never knew they'd been fooled. James Thornton returned to England in late 1945. He never spoke publicly about his wartime service. The Official Secrets Act forbade it, and besides, who would believe him? When people asked what he'd done during the war, he'd smile vaguely and say, "Engineering work, nothing exciting." He returned to theatrical design, working on West End productions and eventually films. Colleagues sometimes noticed his peculiar habit of squinting through a brass tube when examining set designs from certain angles, but no one understood why. The kaleidoscope stayed with him until his death in 1976. His daughter found it among his effects, scratched and battered, with cryptic markings scratched into the brass. She nearly threw it away, not knowing it was the tool that had helped fool the Luftwaffe and save countless lives.
War, we are told, is about strength, firepower, industrial might. The nation with the most tanks, the biggest bombs, the strongest soldiers will prevail. But James Thornton's story reminds us of a different truth. Sometimes the greatest weapon is not force, but imagination. Sometimes victory comes not from destroying the enemy, but from making them destroy the wrong target. Sometimes a child's toy pressed against the eye of a creative mind can accomplish what 1,000 artillery pieces cannot. In the vast machinery of the Second World War, with its millions of soldiers and industrial production measured in megatons, it's easy to overlook the individuals who fought with unconventional weapons. The artists who became warriors not by learning to kill, but by learning to deceive. The theater designers who staged performances for an audience of enemy reconnaissance planes. These were the soldiers who understood that perception is reality, that what the enemy believes is often more important than what actually exists. They proved that creativity under pressure could turn scraps into armies, that attention to detail could redirect entire military operations, and that sometimes the most devastating attack is the one that never comes. James Thornton didn't destroy enemy tanks. He didn't capture territory or kill enemy soldiers. But with cardboard, paint, canvas, and a kaleidoscope, he convinced the Luftwaffe to bomb empty sand, while real soldiers advanced unopposed toward victory. In the end, that is perhaps the greatest magic trick of all, making the impossible seem ordinary, and the ordinary seem impossible. War demands many kinds of courage. The courage to charge into gunfire, certainly, but also the courage to stand in the desert with a child's toy, adjusting the angle of a painted shadow, and believing that this small act of creativity might save lives. That is the legacy of the soldier who tricked the Luftwaffe, not with strength, but with sight, not with power, but with perspective, not with weapons of war, but with the tools of wonder.